Jamal Rivers was just 13 when he solved a math equation. His white teacher couldn't even attempt. The class watched in stunned silence, but instead of praise, he was pulled into the principal's office, alone. Hours later, his grades vanished from the system, and, as mother, a school janitor, found a document in the trash marked Relocation Protocol, Jamal Rivers. And then a call came with no caller ID. If you want your son to stay in school, stop asking questions. Cut to black. But what they didn't know is that Jamal wasn't the only one. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The late September sun poured faint light through the fingerprint-smeared windows of room 208, casting long shadows across the desks. Fairview Middle School, nestled in the heart of suburban Atlanta, appeared like any other institution of learning. Red brick facade, trimmed hedges, a bright blue flag waving in front. But behind the polished veneer pulsed something colder. An invisible but unmistakable hierarchy governed the school's culture, more rigid than its outdated dress code, and it was silently enforced every day through unspoken rules, subtle glances, and the low murmur of prejudice that snuck between test scores and teachers' comments. Mr. Alden Clive had taught here for over 2 decades, a man whose neat comb-over and coffee-stained teeth marked him as someone aged not just by time, but by entitlement. Students knew his classroom as both kingdom and courtroom. His word was law, and his judgments often came with sharp sarcasm. He prided himself on discipline and standards, yet his praise seemed mysteriously reserved for white students, or those who lived in the better zip codes. He smiled widest for the children of lawyers, dentists, and executives, and was notorious for rolling his eyes anytime someone from the wrong side of town dared raise their hand too eagerly. So when he scribbled a sprawling algebraic expression on the whiteboard that morning, a dizzying tangle of variables, coefficients, exponents, and nested parentheses, it was not for learning. It was for spectacle. "This," he said, uncapping the final marker and underlining the tail end of the equation with theatrical flair, "is a problem that most college students struggle to solve. You're welcome to try it if you're brave enough." The class erupted in a nervous mix of laughter and groans. A few students leaned back, others whispered, and some didn't bother to look up from their phones under the desk. But in the second row, near the far left window, sat Jamal Rivers, his notebook pristine, his pencil tapping gently in thought. Jamal was quiet. Always had been. Not shy, just observant. At 13, he had the cautious eyes of someone who had seen too much of the world too early, and knew when to listen rather than speak. Most teachers overlooked him. Mr. Clive often referred to him by the wrong name, and yet Jamal never missed a homework deadline. His test scores were perfect, his notes meticulous, and yet he was never called gifted. Not once. He raised his hand. The room went still.
Mr. Clive blinked, his mouth tightened. "Yes. Jordan?"
"Jamal," he said softly. "Of course. Jamal. You want to give it a try?" The sarcasm was palpable, like a trapdoor with hinges already creaking. "Yes, sir." Gasps flickered through the classroom. A few students snickered. One girl whispered, "Is he serious?" Jamal rose without bravado. He walked to the board with quiet determination. Mr. Clive stepped aside, arms crossed. There was no encouragement in his posture, just anticipation of failure. Jamal studied the equation for 3 full seconds. Then he picked up the blue marker and began writing. The room went silent. It wasn't just that he was solving it. It was how. His movements were confident, precise, elegant. He didn't hesitate. He didn't scribble or backtrack. Each line flowed into the next like music, building on itself. He didn't just reach the correct answer. He explained the reasoning behind each step as he worked, not to the teacher but aloud, so that the class could understand. I isolated the exponential term first because it's the highest order operation. Once that's simplified, the coefficients cancel each other out, and you're left with a linear reduction. After substitution, even students who usually dozed off in math were now leaning forward, watching, absorbing. It was mesmerizing. At the end of exactly 57 seconds, Jamal put the cap back on the marker and underlined the final answer. Then, without looking at Mr. Clive, he returned to his seat. A beat of silence. Then another. Mr. Clive's mouth was slightly open, as if mid-thought, but no sound came out. His eyes were fixed on the board. He knew it was correct. He knew it was beyond even his own original method. He knew, and so did every student in that room. that he had just been outclassed by a child he had dismissed every day of the semester. The silence turned heavy. One student clapped, then stopped, uncertain. No one laughed this time. Mr. Clive blinked rapidly, clearing his throat. That was interesting, he muttered. Then, without warning, he turned on his heel, walked to his desk, picked up his cell phone, and walked out of the classroom, leaving the door open behind him. The class looked at each other in stunned confusion. No one spoke. Jamal kept his head down, quietly flipping his notebook to the next page. Outside, Mr. Clive pressed the phone to his ear. His jaw was clenched. Yes, Deborah, it's Alden. We've got a situation. There was a long pause on the other end. Whatever was being said, his eyes shifted from concern to calculation.
No.
Not about the equation, he said, glancing through the window at the classroom. About perception. We need to talk before this spreads. Inside, the math problem still glowed from the whiteboard, an undeniable monument to genius. Mr. Clive's next move wasn't academic. It was personal. He wasn't planning how to support Jamal. He was planning how to make him disappear. Just down the hallway from room 208, the administrative wing of Fairview Middle felt like a world apart. Quieter, colder, curated. The walls were lined with photographs of smiling students, trophies, and staged classroom moments. The largest photo, however, sat right behind Principal Deborah Lear's desk, her standing beside a state senator, receiving an Excellence in Equity award. To her, that plaque mattered more than the children she was supposed to serve. Principal Lears was not the kind of woman to raise her voice or slam fists. Her power came in silence, in smiles laced with conditions, and in emails that said everything without saying anything. She was the face of administrative control, polished, politically correct, and deeply invested in appearances. When Mr. Clive entered her office unannounced, she was already on edge. He didn't knock, just walked in, eyes jittery, phone still warm in his palm. We've got a situation, he said, lowering his voice. Lears looked up, removing her glasses. What kind of situation? Clive hesitated. He didn't mention the equation first. He talked about discipline, about decorum, about that boy, disrupting the hierarchy, in his classroom. Eventually he said it. He solved it in under a minute, Clive whispered. He didn't even blink. Lears raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. And you're suggesting he cheated? I'm suggesting he had help, Clive said, not fully committing, but planting the seed. Someone could have given him the answer. Maybe he saw it somewhere. Is it a textbook problem? No. It's mine. I created it. I've used it for years. Now, that got her attention. Lears sat up straighter. So there's no way he could have accessed it. None. For a few seconds she stared at her computer screen. Then, as if brushing dust off a surface, she folded her hands. Then we need to proceed carefully. If this goes public, it'll look politically inconvenient. Clive nodded, a bead of sweat forming on his brow. The kid's mother is the cleaning lady. Lear's lips pressed into a tight line. Let's bring him in, she said, quietly. No parents. Within 10 minutes, Jamal's name was called over the intercom. He gathered his books, not sure why, but the air in the classroom already felt heavier. Some students looked at him. Others looked away. No one spoke. When he arrived at the front office, he was directed past the secretary without explanation. A guidance counselor walked him down the hallway like a prisoner. No eye contact, no small talk, and deposited him into Principal Lear's office. The door clicked shut behind him. Have a seat, Jamal, Lear said, gesturing toward the chair in front of her desk. She didn't smile. He sat, backpack still on, eyes darting between her and Mr. Clive, who stood stiffly near the bookshelf, arms folded. Jamal didn't know what was happening, but his stomach had already twisted into knots. I want to talk to you about what happened in math class today, Lears began. Jamal nodded. That was an impressive performance, she continued, her tone almost warm. Almost. But some questions have come up regarding how you were able to solve that equation so quickly. I just solved it, Jamal replied, his voice steady but soft. Lears leaned forward slightly, voice now gentler, coaxing. Did anyone help you before class today? Did you maybe see that equation somewhere? Jamal blinked. No. I've never seen it before. I just recognized the pattern. Clive snorted quietly in the corner. Lears turned to him. Mr. Clive says this equation isn't part of the curriculum. So how did you know what to do? I study online, Jamal said. There's a YouTube channel that teaches advanced math and I watch it when I help my mom clean after school. She tilted her head. So you're saying your mother, the janitor, encourages you to learn college-level algebra? Jamal looked down, his hands tightening around the strap of his backpack. Yes, ma'am. The silence stretched. It was the kind of silence designed to make someone feel smaller. Well, Lear said, finally standing. Until we look further into this, we're going to place a temporary academic hold on your records. That means no participation in competitions, no special assignments, and we'll need to verify all your past scores. Jamal's heart dropped. But I didn't cheat. This isn't about punishment, Lear said smoothly. It's about integrity. We have to make sure everything is fair. Clive didn't say a word. He didn't have to. They didn't call Clarice, Jamal's mother. They didn't send a written notice. No due process. Just an erasure. Polite, clinical, and surgical. Jamal left the office feeling like a shadow of himself. He didn't cry. Not yet. But something inside him folded. Something that had once believed school was a place that rewarded merit. Back in room 208, Clive erased the board and went back to his lesson, as if nothing had happened. The equation was gone. So was the truth. But outside the walls of the school, the video was still circulating. Unbeknownst to them, a student had captured the entire moment on their phone. Jamal's calm brilliance, the stunned silence, the teacher's exit. Though it hadn't gone viral yet, it had reached a few hundred views by nightfall. None of that mattered to the administration. Not yet. What mattered was control, containing the disruption, preserving the image. Later that evening, as the school emptied out and the sun dipped low behind the pine trees, Principal Lears sat alone at her desk. She reopened Jamal's file, now flagged with a bright yellow tag. Under review. She picked up the phone, dialing a private number, not a parent, not a teacher, a district official. I'm flagging a student, she said calmly. Rivers, Jamal. Yes, that Rivers. Let's initiate academic review protocols immediately. We can't afford a spectacle. On her screen, the photo of her Excellence in Equity Award gleamed in the reflection of the overhead light. Lears hangs up the phone and opens a confidential email thread labeled High-Risk Students, Containment Measures. The scent of ammonia clung to Clarice Rivers' hoodie as she stepped off the bus and into the cracked pavement of their apartment complex in Eastwood Heights. It was nearly her legs ached from back-to-back shifts, first at the downtown nursing home, then her janitorial job at Fairview Middle. Her knuckles were raw from scrubbing cafeteria trays and dragging trash bins. But what hurt most wasn't physical. It was that look in Jamal's eyes when she got home. He didn't have to say anything. She saw it the moment she walked through the door, a flicker of something she hadn't seen before. Doubt. Hey baby, she said, voice warm but thin, setting down her tote and untying her shoes. Jamal sat at the corner of their small kitchen table, a workbook open in front of him, a pencil resting still. His notebooks were always open, always marked with numbers and lines that danced in impossible shapes. But tonight, the pages looked untouched. He forced a smile. Hey ma, you eat? She asked. Yeah, he lied. Clarice didn't push. Not yet. Instead, she walked over, brushed her hand through his hair, and kissed the top of his head. I'm proud of you, she said, without knowing the full story, but sensing it, the way mothers often do. After a quick rinse and change of clothes, Clarice packed her cleaning cart and returned to Fairview for her overnight custodial shift. Most nights, she found peace in the silence of the empty school. But tonight, every hallway felt heavier, every squeaky floorboard like an omen. Her mind kept circling Jamal's face, his silence. Something was wrong, and it wasn't just exhaustion. By the time she reached the West Wing, it was well past midnight. She saved Mr. Clive's room for last, like she always did, not out of respect, but because she hated it. The room had a coldness to it. His desk was always locked. His tone clipped even in casual conversation, and he never once looked her in the eye. As she pushed her mop bucket inside, the echo of hushed voices made her pause. Her heart skipped. She wasn't alone. At first she thought maybe another custodian was in the room, or maybe a staff member had forgotten something. But as she stepped quietly around the corner toward the supply closet, she heard the unmistakable sound of Mr. Clive's voice. Sharp, hurried, agitated. I told you, he made a fool of me in front of the entire class, he hissed. If we let this slide, every other kid like him is going to think they belong in honors programs. Clarice froze. Her hands tightened around the mop handle. Another voice replied. Principal Lears. Calm, measured. Then we make it about process, Lear said. We question the integrity of the work. We say it's under review. The public won't ask questions if we say it's procedural. And if it spreads? Clive asked. Lears paused. We'll recommend a relocation. Clarice's breath caught. She ducked quietly behind the doorframe of the adjacent supply closet, peering through a sliver between the hinges. Clive was standing near his desk, phone pressed to his ear. Lear's voice was coming through speakerphone, distorted but clear. Relocation? Clive asked. A transfer, she said. We'll reframe it as an opportunity, somewhere quieter, more appropriate for his developmental needs. Clarice's blood turned to ice. She didn't make a sound, didn't move. Her pulse roared in her ears. They were talking about Jamal. A relocation? A developmental reassignment? Like he was a problem to be moved, not a child with brilliance to nurture. She gritted her teeth. No one will notice, Clive asked, skeptical. Lears replied, by the time they do, it'll be buried under paperwork. The mother won't fight. She's staff. She can't afford to. Clarice swallowed hard. They didn't see her. They didn't see her. Not as a parent. Not as a person. Just a cleaning lady, with tired shoes and silent pride. But they were wrong. As soon as the call ended, and Clive disappeared into the hallway, Clarice slowly slipped into his classroom. The fluorescent lights buzzed above her as she scanned the room, her breath short and shallow. Something on the edge of his desk caught her eye. A manila folder tucked into the corner of a half-filled trash bin. It was folded awkwardly, the top corner peeking out just enough to show the letterhead, Fairview Middle School, internal recommendation form. Her hands trembled as she pulled it out. The paper inside bore the header, Student Relocation Proposal, Jamal Rivers, her son's name. Typed. Underlined. She flipped through the pages. The language was sterile, clinical, and devastating. Inconclusive aptitude evidence, peer disruption concern, psychological evaluation suggested. Each line hit like a slap. He hadn't caused disruption. He had answered a question, brilliantly, publicly, unforgettably. And that was the real problem. Clarice's knees buckled. She leaned against the desk, mouth tight, eyes burning. For years she'd scrubbed floors, emptied trash cans, erased the chalk marks of teachers who didn't know her name, all for the sake of giving her son a future. And now they were trying to erase him. She shoved the documents into her tote bag, heart pounding. For a moment she stood in the quiet of the room, staring at the whiteboard, now wiped clean of the equation Jamal had solved, just hours earlier. The same board where he had made magic, and where they had decided to make him disappear. No, not her son. They could mop over her reflection. They could ignore her footsteps, but they would not silence her child's mind. As she left the room, a new expression hardened on her face. Not exhaustion, not fear. Resolve. Just as Clarice exits the building, she receives a call from an unknown number. When she answers, a robotic voice says, "This is a warning. Stop asking questions." The Monday following Clarice's discovery was the beginning of a quiet storm, one that didn't arrive with thunder or lightning, but with whispers, silence, and vanishing paper trails. Jamal sat at his desk in room 208, his fingers curled tightly around a mechanical pencil, as he looked down at the quiz just handed back to him. No grade, no markings, just a blank header with his name underlined and the words incomplete written in red across the top. His stomach dropped. He had completed every question. He remembered it clearly, proofs, calculations, and written explanations, all done meticulously. He even double-checked his answers before submitting. But now, it was as if the quiz had erased itself. He looked up. Mr. Clive stood at the whiteboard, scribbling a new equation, not once glancing his way. "Excuse me, sir?" Jamal raised his hand, trying to keep his voice level. "I think there's a mistake on." Clive didn't turn around. "If you didn't complete the assignment properly, Jamal," he said calmly, "that's on you." A few heads turned toward Jamal, who slowly lowered his hand. He felt a strange wave of embarrassment heat his neck. Not confusion, humiliation. This was the third time in 2 weeks. The last worksheet had been marked, not submitted, though he remembered handing it in. The test before that was returned ungradable, citing a misalignment in format. The feedback portal online suddenly stopped showing his score, and the once straight-A student was now being shown as average, unstable performance in the grading system. He hadn't changed, but everything around him had. At lunch, Jamal sat alone at the edge of the cafeteria, his food tray untouched. Around him, the buzz of other students filled the air. He'd become a curiosity, once admired, now viewed with quiet suspicion. A few whispered when he passed. Some just stared. That night, Clarice sat across from him at the kitchen table, a pile of documents spread between them. Test results, printouts, assignments, notes. "I know you did these," she said, tapping one page with her index finger. "This is college level, Jamal." He nodded slowly, the defeat visible in his eyes. "They're saying I didn't turn it in." Clarice clenched her jaw. "They're lying." She had already confronted the front office twice. Each time she was met with vague apologies. "We're experiencing system delays. Sometimes submissions get lost in transition. We're looking into it." Each answer polished, professional, and deeply hollow. One evening, Clarice requested a sit-down meeting with Principal Lears. She arrived wearing her best cardigan and borrowed heels. She had a folder tucked beneath her arm, filled with evidence. She was ready. She wasn't cleaning floors tonight. She was fighting for her son. Lears greeted her with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Clarice, come in." "I have concerns," Clarice began, placing the folder on the desk. "My son's grades don't reflect his work. Assignments are disappearing. His confidence is." She paused, voice tightening, breaking. Lears opened the folder casually, flipping through the documents as if reviewing grocery coupons. "Grades fluctuate," she said smoothly. "It's part of the academic process. 3 assignments lost in 2 weeks is not a fluctuation." Clarice snapped. "It's sabotage." Lears stiffened, her smile faltering just slightly. "I understand your frustration, but Mr. Clive is a senior educator with over 20 years of experience. I trust his methods." "What about Jamal's test scores? His standardized exams? He's outperforming everyone." "There's more to a student than numbers," Lears replied, her voice lowering. "Behavior, participation, peer interaction." Clarice's chest burned. "Are you saying my son is a problem?" "I'm saying," Lears said, folding her hands, "that we're assessing the whole picture, not just what's on paper." Clarice stood, fighting the quiver in her voice. "You don't want him to succeed because he doesn't fit the picture you want to present. You want shiny kids from shiny homes." "That's not fair," Lears said quickly. "No," Clarice said, turning toward the door. "It's not, but it's what's happening." She left the office with her fists clenched so tightly the nails left marks in her palms. Back home, Jamal was shrinking. Slowly, quietly. He no longer stayed up late working on problems. He avoided talking about school. His once vibrant scribbles on the whiteboard they'd set up in the living room were now reduced to faint outlines. "I don't get it, Ma," he whispered one night, as she tucked him in. "I did everything right." Clarice sat on the edge of his bed, brushing his hair from his forehead. "Baby, it's not you. It's them. They're scared of you." "Why?" "Because you make them see what they don't want to believe. That someone like you can be better than them." Jamal didn't reply. His eyes stayed open long after she turned out the lights. Then came Wednesday. The day started like any other. Jamal arrived at school early, books in hand, earbuds playing soft piano music. He walked to his locker and turned the combination. As he opened the door, a folded note fell out. He looked around. The hallway was mostly empty. He picked it up and unfolded it slowly. In jagged, rushed handwriting, one sentence was written: "They're going to fail you no matter what." There was no name, no signature, nothing else. Just the truth, naked and terrifying. He stared at the note, his breath quickening. His eyes scanned the hallway again, but whoever had left it was gone. He tucked the note into his pocket and headed to class, heart pounding. But the warning had already taken root. Doubt wasn't just an emotion now, it was evidence. Later that day, as he sat through another lesson while pretending to focus, Jamal noticed something strange on Mr. Clive's desk. A folder, slightly ajar, revealed a printed spreadsheet. His name, his grades, and next to it, a column marked Discipline Correlation Analysis. Before he could process what that meant, Mr. Clive caught his gaze and quickly closed the folder. That evening, Jamal gets an anonymous email with a subject line that reads, "You're not the first." It started with a quiet notification ping in the dead of night. Tasha Bellamy, a soft-spoken 8th grader, known more for her sketchbook than her Snapchat stories, sat on her bed scrolling absent-mindedly through TikTok. She had barely thought twice about posting the video. It was just something she captured out of habit. The way Jamal stood at the board, calm and composed, dismantling Mr. Clive's so-called unsolvable equation, had struck her. She'd felt something shift in that room, something unspoken but electric. So when she uploaded it to her private account, just 64 followers, mostly classmates and cousins, it wasn't for clout. It was because deep down, it felt important. But now, at 2:12 a.m., the view count read. Tasha blinked. She refreshed the app. By morning, the number had climbed past 1.1 million. And with the views came the comments. Hundreds, then thousands. Some praising Jamal's brilliance. Others pointing out the sharp, uncomfortable silence that followed his solution. And more still asking, demanding, why no one in that room, least of all the teacher, acknowledged the moment for what it was: extraordinary. By the time the school bell rang that morning, Jamal's name was on Twitter, Instagram, and Reddit threads under hashtags like MathGenius and Jamal Rivers. He didn't know any of this when he arrived at Fairview Middle. He didn't see the way some students glanced at him, with wide eyes, or how others whispered as he walked past. He didn't even notice that Mr. Clive looked more rigid than usual, his eyes flicking toward his phone every few minutes. It wasn't until second period that things began to click. Tasha caught up with him in the hallway, out of breath, phone in hand. Jamal, she said, pulling him aside. You've seen this, right? He shook his head. She turned her screen to him. There it was, the now infamous video. Him standing at the whiteboard, solving the problem. Clive's frozen expression. The awkward stillness in the room. Why is this? It's everywhere, she said. People are calling you the math kid who broke the system. There's articles, comments. Even a celebrity posted it. Jamal stared at the screen, overwhelmed. It's real, he said quietly. Tasha nodded. It's true. But not everyone celebrated. That same afternoon, behind closed doors, Fairview's administrative office was in chaos. Principal Lears stood in front of a projection of the video, flanked by 2 district officials, and the head of school communication. This is a problem, Lears said, voice low but tense. The narrative being spun is damaging. It's not just about the video, one official said. It's what it implies, that a student we've placed under review is being silenced, and that the teacher is being portrayed as, what? Racist? Incompetent? Lears snapped. No one said it, the communications officer replied carefully, but that's what people are hearing. They watched again as Jamal's clean logic flowed across the board. They watched the way Clive stood frozen. They watched the class's awkward stillness, and then they watched the silence, that long, deliberate pause where nothing was said. Do we know who posted it? Someone asked. Lears turned to her assistant. Yes, a student named Tasha Bellamy. The decision came fast. Within an hour, Tasha was pulled from class and escorted to the principal's office. She sat across from Lears, trying to keep her voice steady. I didn't mean anything, she said. I just thought it was cool. He's smart. People needed to see that. Lears folded her hands. This wasn't an authorized recording. You violated classroom policy. I wasn't even showing anyone's face. You filmed a teacher without permission. Tasha swallowed hard. Are you suspending me? We're considering disciplinary action, Lears replied smoothly. We'll also be contacting your parents. That afternoon, a school-wide email went out. Unauthorized recordings during instructional time are a breach of school policy and will result in disciplinary review. But the damage, or depending on perspective, the justice had already begun. National accounts were now tagging Fairview Middle directly. Advocates and education leaders started weighing in. One civil rights attorney tweeted, "When brilliance from a black student threatens the system fights back." Jamal Rivers is a name we won't forget. Some teachers within the school felt the shift too. A young science teacher, Mr. Ben Rosen, paused his class to say, "You all know Jamal? That kid's a genius. Don't let anyone make him feel otherwise." Others, like Mr. Clive, grew colder. In his next class, he instructed students to leave phones in a locked box at the door. There will be no more distractions, he said firmly. Jamal, meanwhile, moved through the halls with a strange mixture of fear and fire inside him. For so long, he'd been invisible. Now, his name was being shouted in places he'd never imagined. But it wasn't just fame. It was scrutiny. It was exposure. It was risk. By the end of the day, Clarice was called in for an unscheduled meeting. She arrived still in her scrubs from the nursing home, anxiety coiling in her stomach. "We're concerned about Jamal's safety," Lear said, sitting across from her. "There's been a sudden influx of attention. Media inquiries. Unwanted pressure. Clarice frowned. Pressure from you, not from him. He didn't ask to go viral. Well, someone posted the video. And that someone showed the world what you've been trying to bury. Lears's smile thinned. I'm warning you, Clarice said, standing slowly, her voice like steel. Don't punish my child because the world finally saw his light. That night, Jamal sat at their tiny kitchen table, watching another video, a popular influencer reacting to his TikTok clip, calling him the future of black excellence. He looked at Clarice. You think this makes them mad? He asked. She gave him a long look, brushing his cheek. No, baby, she whispered. You made them afraid. That's worse. The next morning, a summons is slipped into Jamal's locker. He's being called to an emergency disciplinary review hearing before the school board. The summons to the disciplinary review hearing had barely settled in Jamal's locker before the quiet war against him escalated into something darker, something deliberate. In the public eye, Jamal was trending upward. His video had crossed 3 million views, and stories about his brilliance were now featured on local news segments and reposted by national education platforms. Yet inside the walls of Fairview Middle School, a very different narrative was unfolding, one written in the shadows of spreadsheets, quiet meetings, and carefully crafted lies. Jamal's mid-semester GPA had always been top of the class. His standardized test scores placed him in the 99th percentile statewide. His math assessments often came back with full scores, sometimes with extra notes from teachers asking how he solved certain problems. But now a strange trend began to surface. A week after the viral video, Jamal received a printed transcript during homeroom, one he hadn't requested. The paper listed his GPA at 3.2, lower than before, much lower. He stared at the page in disbelief. 1 B plus, 2 C's, and an incomplete. His heart sank. He turned to his homeroom teacher, Mrs. Redmond, a kind but cautious woman, and held out the page. Is this right? She glanced at the printout, then frowned. That's strange. I thought you had straight A's last quarter. I did, he said, voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what to tell you, she replied softly. You might want to check with the front office. He did. Twice. Each time he was told that the grades reflected the system, and that no errors had been found. But Jamal remembered the grades he saw before. He had screenshots saved in his school portal account. But when he logged in again, those previous grades had been replaced with the altered versions. The digital trail had vanished. Clarice came home from her night shift exhausted, and leaned against the kitchen counter as Jamal slid the new transcript in front of her. Her breath caught. This can't be right, she said, eyes darting over the numbers. I know, Jamal replied, numb, but it's in the system now. Clarice's body sagged. She knew this wasn't just sabotage, it was systemic erasure. They were rewriting her son's future. She tried reaching out again to the school office, but was stonewalled with jargon and carefully rehearsed apologies. The system sometimes recalibrates GPA scales mid-year, one clerk said. It's an algorithm thing. But Clarice wasn't buying it. Late that night, after finishing her second shift, she sat on the worn couch, phone in hand, searching. Her thumbs hovered over the cracked screen, scrolling through local education advocacy pages. That's when she found the name, Dr. Leroy Hayden, a former professor turned education rights activist, known for taking on schools that buried black excellence in policy. The next morning, she made the call. Dr. Hayden met Clarice and Jamal 2 days later at a small community center off Peachtree Avenue. He was in his early 50s, his voice deliberate, his presence heavy with quiet authority. He wore no suit, just jeans, a pressed shirt, and reading glasses that hung from his collar. He listened. He didn't interrupt. Then he asked for the documents. Clarice handed over the altered transcript, screenshots of the previous grades, Jamal's test scores, his quiz sheets, his notebooks, everything they had. Dr. Hayden spent the next hour comparing, cross-referencing, checking timestamps, and even logging into the school portal through Clarice's account. After a long silence, he looked up, face pale with realization. This isn't just grade manipulation, he said. It's targeted data suppression. What does that mean? Jamal asked quietly. It means someone inside the system is actively erasing your academic performance to change your future. Hayden explained. This isn't a glitch. This is sabotage. Clarice's hands trembled. But why? Why go this far? Dr. Hayden leaned back in his chair. Because if you qualify for gifted programs, scholarships or magnet schools, They have to report it. It becomes part of Fairview's academic legacy. And if that legacy is carried by a black janitor's son, a boy from the Eastwood Heights district, it shatters their image of control. They would rather rewrite the narrative than uplift it. Hayden requested full access to Jamal's academic history, citing education law. A reluctant district clerk complied, and what he found in the archived records made his blood run cold. There were records of edits to Jamal's GPA log, logged from internal admin accounts, notes labeled adjust per oversight, and temporary hold pending verification. These notes weren't mistakes, they were intentional roadblocks. But it didn't stop there. As Hayden dug further, he discovered an internal database of academic adjustments. And in that file, Jamal wasn't the only name flagged. There were others, most of them students of color from lower-income zip codes. One file stood out. A name, Darius Kemp, a brilliant student from 5 years ago. Similar academic profile, high test scores, mathematical aptitude, but then nothing. His grades plummeted. He was labeled socially disruptive, removed from the gifted program, and relocated to a continuation school. The last note on his file read, "No further academic tracking necessary." Dr. Hayden stared at the screen. "What happened to him?" Clarice asked. "I don't know," Hayden said, voice tight. "There's no trace of him in any public school after that year. It's like he disappeared." Clarice's breath hitched. "They did this before," Hayden murmured, "and they got away with it." Jamal looked between them, eyes burning. "They're trying to do it again." Hayden nodded. "Unless we stop them." Clarice gripped the edge of the table. "How?" "We file a civil complaint under the state education code," Hayden said. "We demand a forensic audit of all academic records, and we bring media into it. The court of public opinion is stronger than you think." "But won't they retaliate?" she asked. Hayden looked at Jamal. "They already are." That night, Clarice lay awake in bed, thinking about the student who vanished. Darius Kemp. What if she had never found the relocation document? What if Jamal had never gone viral? Would he have disappeared too? She turned toward the cracked ceiling and made herself a promise. "Not this time. Not my son." The next morning, Jamal receives a plain white envelope at their front door. Inside is a single photo of Darius Kemp, with one sentence scrawled in ink. "They buried him. Don't let them bury you." The fluorescent lights of the Fairview School District boardroom buzzed faintly overhead, casting a sterile white glow across the long oak conference table. The room was intentionally austere, whitewashed walls, framed mission statements, and a row of stiff-backed leather chairs arranged like a jury box. It wasn't built for truth, it was built for control. At precisely 6:00 p.m., the doors opened. Clarice Rivers stepped in first, her chin high despite the fatigue that clung to her bones. She wore her best gray blazer over her work blouse, the one with the bleach stain on the sleeve she tried to hide by cuffing it twice. Her heels clicked softly across the linoleum, followed by Dr. Leroy Hayden, whose briefcase was bursting with documents, printed emails, transcripts and screenshots, the truth, neatly alphabetized and ready for war. Jamal walked between them, wearing the only collared shirt he owned. He looked older than he had weeks ago, not in his height or face, but in his eyes. They had changed, hardened. He wasn't just fighting for himself now, he was carrying the weight of every buried student who came before him. The boardroom was already half full, administrators in suits, teachers sitting rigidly in metal chairs along the wall, and a few scattered parents who had heard rumblings of the controversy online. Clive stood at the far end of the room beside Principal Lears, his arms crossed, sweat blooming at his temples. Lears whispered something into his ear, her face unreadable. At the center of the table sat 7 board members, each with nameplates and bottled water, flipping casually through the packets in front of them. The chairwoman, Margaret Trenton, looked up as Clarice approached the microphone. "You have 10 minutes, she said flatly. "Please state your name for the record." Clarice nodded once, then leaned into the mic. "My name is Clarice Rivers. I'm here as a mother, and I'm here because my son, Jamal, is being erased." The room stirred slightly. One of the board members, an older white man with horn-rimmed glasses, sighed audibly and began tapping his pen on the table. Clarice noticed. She kept going anyway.
"My son is 13.
"He's brilliant. He studies every night, helps me clean classrooms, after hours, teaches himself advanced algebra from online courses. But instead of being celebrated for solving a problem his teacher couldn't, he's been punished, silenced, targeted." She She paused, her voice tightening. They've changed his grades, hidden his scores, falsified his records, and they've done it behind closed doors while smiling to my face. Some members looked away. One glanced at the clock. Then Hayden stepped forward. I'm Dr. Leroy Hayden, educational equity consultant and advocate, he said, placing a thick folder on the table. What Mrs. Rivers just shared isn't speculation. It's documented. This folder contains before and after grade reports, timestamps from the school's internal system, flagged login attempts from administrative accounts, and comparison transcripts showing academic suppression. He opened the folder and pulled out a printed copy of Jamal's original GPA, then the altered one now reflected in the school portal. He pointed to the changes, line by line. This isn't a clerical error. This is a pattern. A murmur rippled through the room. But Hayden wasn't done. He reached into his briefcase and lifted a tablet. This is a copy of the video that went viral, he said, turning the screen toward the board. It shows Jamal solving an advanced equation in under 60 seconds, while his teacher, Mr. Clive, stands silent. And yet, no formal recognition was made. Instead, within 48 hours of this video spreading, Jamal's grades were downgraded, and he was flagged for academic dishonesty. He tapped again. A split screen appeared. One side showed Jamal's current report card. The other showed a list of scholarship programs he was now ineligible for because of his recalculated GPA. Board member Cynthia Morales leaned forward. Wait, this was the basis for denying him access to the STEM honors program. Yes, Hayden replied. And it was done without parent notification, proper review, or Jamal's knowledge. Another teacher in the back lowered her gaze. Margaret Trenton shifted in her seat. Mr. Clive, would you like to respond? Clive cleared his throat, stepping forward slowly. Jamal is a bright student. No one's denying that. But brilliance doesn't excuse behavioral irregularities. Clarice's head snapped toward him. Such as? Hayden asked. There have been concerns about his attitude, Clive continued. Disruptive tendencies. He's overly confident. Hayden narrowed his eyes. You're penalizing confidence now? I'm saying, Clive replied, flustered, that not all intelligence is academic. And not all prejudice wears a hood, Clarice said, standing abruptly. The room stilled. She didn't shout. Her voice was low, firm, razor sharp. My son embarrassed you. That's the real crime here, isn't it? He stood up and did something you couldn't. And instead of mentoring him, instead of guiding him, you tried to erase him. Clive didn't reply. He didn't need to. His silence said enough. One of the board members, a young black woman named Talia Green, turned toward Trenton. I move that we initiate an independent investigation into Fairview Middle's academic practices regarding gifted students, especially students of color. I second that, Morales said, adjusting her glasses. Trenton hesitated. The motion is noted. But in the meantime, she paused, glancing at the printed notes in front of her. Until this matter is resolved, the board has agreed that Jamal Rivers will be placed under academic probation. Effective immediately, this includes restriction from all extracurriculars and gifted programs. Clarice's breath caught. What? You said you wanted fairness, Trenton said, her voice like ice. This is how we ensure neutrality during the investigation. No, Hayden said firmly. This is how you maintain the illusion of control. But the gavel had already struck. The hearing ended in a blur of shuffling papers, hushed voices, and glances that refused to meet eyes. As Jamal stood to leave, he felt it again, that quiet wall of dismissal. Not shouts, not slurs, just the cold, bureaucratic mechanism of racism. Outside the boardroom, Clarice broke down. I did everything right, she whispered, gripping the handle of her purse. I brought proof. We showed them everything. You did, Hayden said, placing a hand on her shoulder. But this isn't about proof, it's about power. Jamal stood a few feet away, staring down the long hallway that led to the exit. His fingers brushed the edge of the folder Hayden had given him, the one with his original scores. He wasn't crying. He wasn't even angry. He was planning. As the family walks back to their car, a man in a worn gray suit approaches Dr. Hayden and slips him a sealed envelope. Inside is a list of 6 other students, all black, all mysteriously transferred, and a note that reads, "This goes deeper than Fairview." The room they gave Jamal was at the far end of the school's west wing, a quiet, forgotten annex behind the library that had once been a supply room. Now hastily repurposed, it held a single student desk, one mounted camera in the corner ceiling, and walls so bare they almost echoed. The door had a small rectangular window like a hospital room, but no one really looked in. They called it the alternative learning environment. The principal said it was for his safety. They said the attention from the media and the online world was putting him at risk, a risk they never defined. Clarice had protested, but the board had already ruled on probation. This was the compromise. Remove Jamal from regular classes, while the so-called investigation continued. But there was no investigation. There was only exile. Every morning Jamal was escorted to the room like a liability. He wasn't allowed to eat lunch in the cafeteria. He couldn't walk the halls during passing periods. He wasn't permitted to attend regular classes. And his class portal showed nothing more than generic assignments designed for remediation. The kind of work assigned to students struggling with basic algebra. Jamal had been solving multivariable calculus problems 6 months ago. Now he was circling multiple choice answers for worksheets that asked him to find the area of a square. He didn't protest. He just took the packets, placed them neatly to the side of his desk, and began creating something else. On the first day in isolation, he started with a blank page. No distractions, no classmates, no lessons, just silence and surveillance. So he invented his own curriculum. He tore notebook pages from his backpack and began writing equations, not ones he had memorized, but original ones. Problems he made up from scratch. The first few were simple, warm-ups, but within days his desk was filled with scribbled matrices, complex functions, proofs that snaked across margins. He wasn't solving anyone else's problems anymore. He was creating his own. Every night, Clarice would come home from work to find the kitchen table covered in notes and folders. She tried not to cry when she saw it. The way he still fought, even when cornered. "You don't have to prove anything to them," she said softly one night, setting down her purse. "I'm not," Jamal replied without looking up. "I'm proving it to myself." She sat beside him, her eyes tracing a formula she didn't understand. "Is that one of theirs?" she asked, pointing to the page. "No," Jamal said, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "It's mine." A week into his isolation, he remembered something. During the height of the viral video's spread, one commenter stood out. Someone with a verified account who had written, "This kid belongs in my classroom." Attached to the comment was a name, Dr. Alan Merritt, professor of mathematics at Emory University. Jamal had screenshotted it, just in case. That night, he composed a letter, handwritten, humble. "Dear Dr. Merritt, you saw me in that video. I'm still the same kid except now I'm in a room by myself all day. I don't have much to do here, so I started writing problems. I don't know if they're good, but I think they're new. I hope you'll take a look. Sincerely, Jamal Rivers." He included 5 of his original problems, hand-solved, neatly written, and mailed it with the few stamps Clarice kept tucked in her Bible. 3 days passed, then 5, then 7. On the 8th day, Jamal entered the room to find a yellow envelope sitting on his desk. His name was written on the front, in neat, looping script. He stared at it, unsure if it was from the school. It wasn't. Inside was a thick packet of paper, marked with comments, annotations, and questions, all scrawled in red ink. At the top was a letter printed on Emory University letterhead. "Jamal, you didn't write problems. You wrote theories. I've never seen anything quite like this. Your second equation in particular, the spiral reduction, appears to mirror a rare phenomenon we teach at the graduate level. The fact that you intuitively arrived at it, and then extended it, that's rare, maybe even historic. I'm coming to Fairview. I want to meet you in person. Hold tight, Dr. Alan Merritt." Jamal read the letter twice. Then again, his chest tightened. His hands shook slightly, not out of fear but something closer to hope, a distant memory of what validation felt like. When Clarice came home that evening, Jamal held up the letter like a medal. She sat down slowly, eyes scanning every word. Her mouth parted as she read, her eyes wetting. "They're not going to win," she whispered. Jamal looked at her. "I think someone finally sees me." The next day, he returned to the isolation room, with new energy. He sat taller, wrote faster, solved harder. His notebooks were now filled with entire proofs, margin notes, even a short essay outlining a possible teaching method for conceptual math. The school still didn't know. They still delivered mindless worksheets. They still monitored him on camera. But something had changed. They couldn't see it, but Jamal felt it. Someone important was coming. And this time, They wouldn't be able to erase him. On the school's security feed, someone in the administration office notices an unfamiliar man walking across the campus lawn, dressed in tweed, holding a leather briefcase, heading straight for the front office. The moment he stepped onto campus, he disrupted the rhythm. Fairview Middle's front office operated like a machine. Automated greetings, clipped phone calls, staff schedules printed in color-coded ink. But when the glass door slid open and Dr. Alan Merritt walked through, everything halted for a beat too long. He wore a dark wool blazer over a pale blue Oxford shirt. A vintage leather satchel hung from his shoulder, worn soft at the edges. His white beard was closely cropped, his eyes sharp and alert beneath thick-rimmed glasses. He didn't carry himself like someone asking permission. "Good morning," he said politely, at the counter, placing his ID badge on the desk. "I'm Dr. Alan Merritt, from Emory University. I'm here to see Jamal Rivers." The receptionist blinked, then instinctively reached for the appointment calendar. "Do you have an appointment scheduled with the principal?" "No," he replied, smiling faintly. "I have an invitation. From the boy." She hesitated, eyes flicking toward the hallway behind her, where the assistant principal stood, already watching. There were protocols, layers of permission, security, notification, but Merritt's presence cut through all of it. He wasn't loud. He didn't threaten, but he looked like someone who was used to being listened to. 10 minutes later, Principal Lears arrived, breath tight and clipboard in hand. "Dr. Merritt," she said, shaking his hand too tightly. "We weren't expecting you." "I'm aware," he said, "but I thought I'd save you the trouble of ignoring another email." She gave a thin smile. "It's district policy to route external visits through the board." "I routed it," he said calmly. "They ignored it. So now I'm here." Lears didn't reply. "I'd like to speak with Jamal Rivers." "Alone," Merritt added, his tone clear but respectful. "We're still in the middle of an internal investigation," Lears said quickly. "The student is under academic probation. He's currently in our alternative learning space." Merritt tilted his head. "You mean the room with the security camera? The one he's not allowed to leave between 8:30 and 3:15? "I've heard." Her composure cracked slightly. He softened his tone just enough. "Let me speak with the boy. If what I've read is even half true, I need to meet him face to face. You and I both know, this is bigger than classroom management." After a brief consultation behind closed doors, and one panicked phone call to a district attorney, Fairview reluctantly agreed. Not because they wanted to, but because outside these walls, the media had already begun to stir, and if they denied access to a tenured professor from Emory University, that was a headline waiting to happen. 20 minutes later, Dr. Merritt stood outside the isolation room, clipboard in hand. Inside, Jamal was hunched over his notebook, sketching out a new proof using layered primes. He didn't notice the door open. "Mr. Rivers," Merritt said gently. Jamal turned. For a moment he froze. Then he stood up, slowly, as if unsure whether he was in trouble. Again, Dr. Merritt smiled. "Mind if I sit?" Jamal nodded, still silent, eyes wide. Merritt pulled the visitor's chair close, opened the notebook Jamal had mailed him, and placed it between them. "You wrote these?" "Yes, sir." Merritt flipped to the spiral reduction problem, the one that had stunned him. "Did you base this on anything? See it in a book or a lecture?" Jamal shook his head. "No. It just came to me when I was looking at circle patterns. I thought maybe there was a shortcut no one had used yet." Merritt stared at him for a long time. "That's not just creativity," he said finally. "That's intuition. You're not just good at math. You understand math, like it speaks to you." Jamal didn't know what to say. He had never heard those words from anyone in power. "I want you to know something," Merritt continued. "You're not alone, and you're not crazy. What they're doing to you, the cameras, the silence, the grade manipulation, that's not education. That's control." Jamal's throat tightened. "I came because I've seen what happens when schools bury students like you. I've seen the cost, not just in test scores, in spirit." He reached into his bag and pulled out a thin packet. "This is an invitation to Emory's summer collegiate research experience. We only take 12 students a year, mostly seniors, but I've never seen anyone with your mind. Not at 13. Not ever." Jamal stared at the folder, not quite believing. "I want you to come," Merritt said. "We'll cover everything. Travel, lodging, tuition. Your only job is to learn." Tears gathered in Jamal's eyes, but he blinked them back. "I'd like that," he whispered. But the celebration was short-lived. That afternoon, as Merritt prepared to leave, he was intercepted by Principal Lears and a district liaison in the front office. "We appreciate your passion," Lears said stiffly, "but we have concerns." Merritt raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "Behavioral concerns," she said. "Jamal has a record of non-compliance, attitude issues." "That's a lie," Merritt said, his voice sharper now. "I've read the reports. I've watched the footage. He's done nothing but exist, loudly, brilliantly, in a system that wasn't built for him." The liaison stepped in. "We're asking that you pause your invitation until our investigation concludes." "I'm not waiting on your permission," Merritt said flatly. "You're defying board procedure." "I'm defending federal law." They stared at him. Then Merritt reached into his coat and handed the liaison a signed certified copy of a legal document. "I filed a formal complaint with the Department of Education under the Equal Educational Opportunities Act. Effective immediately, Fairview Middle School is under review for academic suppression based on race and socioeconomic bias." Lears paled. "You'll be hearing from federal auditors within the week," Merritt continued. "I'd suggest gathering your records, the real ones, before someone else does." He turned to leave, pausing only once. "And let Jamal out of that room. He doesn't belong in a cage. He belongs in a lab." As the door shut behind him, silence gripped the office like a vice. Clarice, waiting in the parking lot, saw him approach. He handed her a copy of the same document and nodded once. "It's begun," he said simply. That evening, a school secretary anonymously emails Dr. Merritt a hidden folder from the district's internal server, filled with classified memos titled, "Intervention Protocols, High-Performing Minority Students." It started with a single microphone. A young local reporter from Channel 4 News stood just outside the gates of Fairview Middle, her windbreaker billowing slightly in the late morning breeze. Behind her, the school's brick facade seemed smaller than usual, like the weight of what was happening had pressed it into something shrunken. "This is more than just a story about one student," she said into the camera. "It's about a system. A brilliant black student, isolated after outperforming expectations. And now documents suggest that this may not be an isolated case." Within hours, other outlets arrived. Local radio, blogs, and eventually national attention. By day's end, there were 5 news vans parked across from the front entrance, their satellite dishes aimed skyward, like antennas tuned to injustice. Reporters asked questions no administrator wanted to answer. Parents walked past the media on their way to pick up their children, whispering, unsure whether to feel proud or afraid. Inside Fairview's administrative wing, panic simmered. Principal Deborah Lears stood in her office, blinds drawn, phone to her ear. Her voice was tight, but her words were steady. "We need to control the narrative. We say we're cooperating fully with the federal investigation. We emphasize Jamal's safety and student privacy." On the other end, the district's PR director was less composed. "That won't work, Deborah. This has gone beyond spin. People are demanding names, accountability, action. What do they want? My resignation? Not just yours," the voice replied. "Clive's too. Possibly more." She didn't respond. Instead, she stared at her computer screen, still open to an unread email with the subject line, "FW Containment Directive, Student Rivers." She didn't click it. Not yet. But someone else already had. That same morning, an English teacher named Ms. Eliza Hart, 10 years into her career at Fairview, quiet, dependable, always staying in her lane, walked into the teacher's lounge with a thumb drive in her coat pocket and a knot in her chest. She hadn't planned to get involved. She had seen things over the years, inconsistencies, sudden transfers, red flags. But like most educators surviving the system, she told herself it was politics, not personal. But Jamal's face, the way he sat in that windowless room, day after day, alone, it haunted her. So she downloaded what she found in the shared faculty drive. A folder labeled Tier 3 Review, Academic Deviation Cases. She didn't understand what it meant at first, but as she opened subfolder after subfolder, reading email chains between Lears, Clive, and higher-ups in the district office, she realized what it was. A playbook. Designed not to support excellence, but to suppress it. The language wasn't overt. It was wrapped in bureaucracy and professional jargon, but the message was unmistakable. Student shows deviation beyond grade-level norms. Recommend containment strategy. If attention intensifies, redirect narrative. Use behavioral flags to justify intervention. Coordinate with registrar to hold transcripts pending verification. Jamal's name appeared more than once. But so did others. Some she recognized, names of students she hadn't seen in years, who had simply left Fairview without explanation. That night, Hart created a private email account, attached the files, and sent them to a group of local journalists, CCing one line, "You wanted proof. Here it is." By noon the next day, the story was everywhere. Headlines blasted across screens. Whistleblower exposes coded racism in school admin emails. Fairview principal used containment tactics to block black students' advancement. District faces federal probe over academic sabotage allegations. Outside the school, protesters gathered. Some carried signs with Jamal's face. Others held posters that read, "Let Black Brilliance Breathe," and this is not just about one kid. A former Fairview parent took the megaphone. "They did this to my daughter 3 years ago," she shouted. "We thought it was just a grading mistake. They told us she wasn't ready for honors, but she was, and now I know why." More voices followed. Stories emerged. Patterns formed. What had started as a single act of brilliance, a boy solving an impossible equation, had ignited a reckoning. A math problem had become a mirror, reflecting the quiet violence of systemic erasure. Jamal, sitting at home that afternoon, watched it all unfold on TV. He didn't speak much. Clarice sat beside him, one hand on his knee. "Do you see?" she said softly. "They see it now." "I'm scared," Jamal admitted. "I am too," Clarice replied. "But we're not hiding anymore." At Fairview, things began to fracture. Parents pulled students from classes. Teachers requested transfers. The school board issued a statement calling the leaked emails deeply concerning and promising full cooperation with federal authorities. But not everyone believed them. And not everyone wanted the truth exposed. That night, after the protests died down and the media lights dimmed, Clarice returned home to find a plain manila envelope resting on her doormat. No postage, no return address. She looked around. The street was quiet. Too quiet. Inside, Jamal was still watching coverage on the laptop. When she opened the envelope, something fell out onto the table. Photocopied documents, old and grainy. She flipped through them slowly. At first she didn't understand what she was looking at. Then she saw the dates, some stretching back 20 years. Then the names. Student profiles, notes, transfer orders, discipline logs, all connected by race, neighborhood, and a chilling pattern of academic obstruction. One page stood out. A chart. 204 Marcus Bell, gifted eligibility blocked, rerouted to remedial learning. 208 Laron Davis, SAT scores withheld, transcript flagged for disciplinary hold. 2012 Naomi Brooks, removed from AP classes after standardized test irregularity. 2017 Darius Kemp, record sealed, relocation form approved, without parent notice. 2024 Jamal Rivers, GPA altered, contained, isolated. Clarice's breath caught. It wasn't just Jamal. It had never been just Jamal. They had a system, a decades-long apparatus designed to make sure kids like hers, smart, black, unshakably bright, never made it past the gatekeepers. She sat down slowly, tears threatening but refusing to fall. Not yet. Then she saw the final page. A list of names, all crossed out, except one. Jamal Rivers, status active, flag, under observation. Recommend final intervention. Her hands shook as she handed it to Jamal. He read it silently. Then, for the first time in weeks, he looked her dead in the eye and said, "We have to finish this." The next morning, Clarice receives an anonymous call, a voice, low and urgent. "The pattern doesn't stop at the school. The superintendent's office has its own files. Look for Project Meridian." Clarice Rivers never wanted to be on a stage. She was the kind of woman who stayed late without asking for overtime, who pressed her uniform before dawn, and walked to the bus stop in silence. Her power had always lived in quiet places, in the care she poured into others, in the way she had taught Jamal to read numbers before letters, in the grace she carried on tired feet. But injustice had a way of making warriors out of the weary. Now she stood beneath bright lights at a press conference in downtown Atlanta, flanked by attorneys, civil rights advocates, and a growing coalition of families who had all come forward since the media storm erupted. She wore no makeup, no polished suit, just her truth. "I was just a mother," she said into the microphone, voice even but heavy with quiet rage. "And they tried to turn me into a warning." Behind her, cameras clicked. The room was full. Reporters, parents, former students. And in the front row, Jamal sat still, hands folded in his lap, watching the woman who used to scrub his teacher's floors, now challenge the entire system they protected. Clarice's voice rose. They couldn't disprove my son's brilliance, so they tried to erase it. When that failed, they came after me. Applause rippled through the room. But the applause couldn't drown out what was happening behind the scenes. Because while Clarice was rising in public, on news broadcasts, in viral interviews, and panel discussions about education reform, she was being hunted in the shadows. Not by police, not by criminals, by lawyers. District attorneys hired by the school board began combing through her life. They requested her employment history, tax filings, even her high school dropout record. They contacted her former landlords, asking invasive questions about rent disputes and noise complaints. Some nights, Clarice noticed unfamiliar cars idling near her apartment, headlights off. Then came the calls. Locked numbers, silent hang-ups, questions posed as threats. One woman called pretending to be a social worker. She asked if Jamal had ever shown signs of aggression. If Clarice had a stable support system, Clarice hung up and locked the doors. "They're not trying to ruin my son anymore," she whispered to Dr. Hayden one night in his office. "They're trying to ruin me." Hayden nodded solemnly. "Because you're the foundation. They know if you break, he falls." But Clarice didn't break. She filed a civil lawsuit, not just against Fairview Middle, but against the district, the principal, and specific board members named in the leaked emails. The suit accused them of academic suppression, racial discrimination, psychological harm, and the systemic targeting of minority students. It was the first lawsuit of its kind in the state's history. Immediately, the backlash intensified. Local right-wing media spun her story into something toxic, accusing her of seeking fame, of exploiting her son, of fabricating the pattern of abuse. Online trolls sent messages to Jamal's school email calling him a liar, a fluke, a diversity stunt. Someone even doctored a photo of Jamal's face onto a mugshot, falsely claiming he'd been arrested. Clarice kept going. She gave interviews, shared court filings, and organized meetings with other families whose children had been silenced. A single mother named Ayesha told her how her daughter had been removed from the gifted program for behavioral imbalance, a label no doctor ever confirmed. A father named Deshaun recounted how his son's standardized test scores had mysteriously disappeared after applying for a magnet high school. One by one, the stories formed a chorus, and Clarice, once voiceless, became their echo. But the pressure was mounting. Jamal saw it in her eyes. He saw how she winced when the phone rang, how she flinched at knocks on the door, how her hands trembled when she tried to reheat dinner, missing the buttons on the microwave. "You don't have to keep fighting this hard," he told her one night. "Yes," she said, setting the food down. "I do. I can transfer schools," he said quietly. Clarice's face hardened. "You think they'll stop? If we give up now, it won't just be you. It'll be the next boy, and the one after that." Jamal lowered his gaze. "I'm tired, Ma." She reached out and held his chin gently. "So am I. But we're not done." Then the twist. A thick envelope arrived by courier 2 weeks later. No name, just a district seal in the corner. Clarice opened it cautiously. Inside, a settlement offer. $200,000, enough to pay off her debts, move out of their apartment, and cover private school tuition for Jamal for the next 3 years. But there was a condition. Jamal had to leave Fairview immediately. No media appearances, no interviews, no lawsuits. The offer was contingent on silence. She read the fine print twice. Then again, her hands shook. Not from temptation but fury. They still believed they could buy dignity. That evening, Clarice sat Jamal down and read him every word of the settlement letter. He listened quietly. "So?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she opened her purse, took out a matchbook from a restaurant they used to go to before things got heavy, and lit one. Then she burned the offer, page by page, in the kitchen sink. Jamal watched it turn to ash. "They think we're a price tag," she said, voice firm. "But we're the receipt." Later that night, Clarice appeared on a nationally televised education panel. The host asked her what it would take for the school district to make things right. Clarice didn't hesitate. "They can't," she said, "because this wasn't an accident. It was a strategy. You can't fix what you're still denying." The audience clapped. But Clarice's focus wasn't on applause. It was on survival, on staying 10 steps ahead of a machine built to chew people like her up. and call it justice. The next morning, a voicemail appears on Clarice's phone. A digitally distorted voice says, "You're making enemies you can't see. If you want Jamal to stay safe, stop digging into Project Meridian." The envelope hadn't even cooled from the courier's hand before it found its way into the trash. Clarice didn't hesitate. She didn't read it twice. The school district's $200,000 settlement offer, quiet money, gag order money, was shredded, incinerated, and flushed out of her conscience before the ink could dry. She knew what they were doing. They were offering a tidy exit, wrapped in a bow of false grace. But the fine print said it all. Jamal would have to leave Fairview. No press, no lawsuits, no interviews, and, more importantly, no record of what had been done to him. No legal admission, no accountability. Clarice didn't fight for exposure. She fought for justice. And silence, no matter how expensive, was not justice. Their lawyer, seated across the table, raised an eyebrow as she fed the letter piece by piece through a portable shredder. "Clarice, this money could change everything. Your debts, the housing situation, Jamal's education." "No," she said, her voice as even as glass. "What it changes is their liability. And I'm not giving them that satisfaction." Beside her, Jamal remained quiet, his hands folded on his lap. He'd read the offer. He'd seen the tuition plan for the private school, the promise of new books, tech labs, robotics clubs. It all looked shiny, polished freedom behind a locked gate. But none of it had his name on it. Not really. It was a settlement designed to erase him, a way to pull him out of the picture before he became a precedent. And Jamal Rivers wasn't here to be forgotten. Outside the district office that week, the community made sure of it. Mothers, teachers, former students, even strangers who had followed Jamal's story, showed up with homemade signs, bullhorns, and a spirit no settlement could muzzle. Protesters lined the streets with banners that read, "This system fears smart black kids, and let black brilliance shine." A 70-year-old retired schoolteacher held a sign that simply read, "I taught Clive, I'm ashamed." The chants echoed for blocks. Clarice stood among them, not as a leader but as a heartbeat. She hugged parents who whispered stories of their own buried children. She cried with teachers who had stayed quiet too long. She spoke softly to news cameras, never theatrical, always clear. "I'm not here for revenge," she said into a reporter's mic. "I'm here for reckoning. 'Cause this doesn't end with Jamal. It started long before him, and if we don't change it now, it'll swallow the next child whole." Inside the chaos, Dr. Alan Merritt was still working. Though Jamal remained isolated under probation, Merritt had begun assembling paperwork for early college admission through Emory's Advanced Collegiate Entry Program. He compiled Jamal's independent math proofs, video documentation of his equation breakdown, and letters from professors nationwide who had reviewed Jamal's work and responded with a unanimous conclusion. He was operating at the level of a third-year undergraduate math major. At age 13, Merritt even pulled strings with faculty across STEM departments to ensure support services, mentorship, and travel stipends. He had never moved this fast for any student, but he also knew he had never seen a mind quite like Jamal's. "I'm getting you out of here," he told Jamal one afternoon during a video call. "You're going where they can't reach you." Jamal nodded, hopeful. But the smile didn't fully come, because Fairview wasn't done fighting. The week after the protest, the school board called for an emergency closed session meeting. Clarice wasn't invited. Neither was Jamal. But Dr. Hayden received an anonymous tip from a sympathetic staffer and showed up anyway, notepad in hand, press credential on his lapel. Inside the chamber, the board presented their final motion. Under the guise of academic integrity and student record irregularities, the board formally recommended Jamal Rivers be expelled from Fairview Middle School. The charge, academic dishonesty. They argued that his rise in performance was suspicious, that external interference had inflated his grades, and that the viral video unfairly manipulated public perception. The vote was scheduled for Friday. Clarice got the notice by email, with the subject line "Expulsion Review Hearing, Rivers Jamal." She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She called a press conference. Standing on the courthouse steps 2 days before the vote, Clarice held up a printed version of the district's email. "They will call my son a liar before they admit they tried to silence him," she said into a sea of microphones. "And if they think they're going to close this chapter without consequence, they are mistaken." Behind her, Jamal stood with Dr. Hayden and Dr. Merritt, a quiet wall of support. But the clock was ticking. The expulsion hearing would take place with or without them. Then, the unexpected happened. On the morning of the hearing, just as the board prepared to enter closed chambers, a woman stood up from the back row of the gallery and asked to speak. She was in her late 40s, modestly dressed, nervous, but firm. "My name is Ms. Evelyn Brooks," she said. "I taught with Mr. Clive years ago, at Broadfield Academy." Board members glanced at one another. Clive stiffened in his seat. "I wasn't going to say anything," she continued, "but I saw the news, and I remembered something." The room held its breath. "There was a student back then," she said, "a young black boy named Tyson Harper. Bright, quiet, gifted in math. Reminded me of Jamal. He beat Mr. Clive in a regional competition. Beat the score Mr. Clive himself had posted as a challenge to his class." She paused. "The next week, Tyson was accused of plagiarizing another student's work. He was expelled. I never saw him again." Clive's face went white. "I later found out," she added, her voice trembling, "that Mr. Clive had rewritten Tyson's assignment in the gradebook. The original work vanished." Murmurs exploded across the chamber. The chairperson pounded the gavel. "Order! Order!" But the story had already broken through the walls. Clarice stood slowly, locking eyes with Clive. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Because in that moment, the silence screamed louder than any accusation. As the board scrambles to adjourn, a journalist in the back receives a breaking alert. The Department of Education has just opened a full-scale Title VI investigation into Fairview School District. By the time the Department of Education's Title VI investigation became public, Fairview Middle School was no longer just a school. It was a symbol of resistance, of exposure, of rock. And beneath the headlines, past the marches and microphones, a quiet force stepped out of the shadows. Her name was Ms. Kayla Brenton, and she had been waiting decades to be heard. She taught language arts at Fairview for over 27 years, the kind of teacher who decorated her classroom with hand-cut paper leaves in fall and wore pins shaped like books. She had retired 5 years earlier, faded into quiet living, and tried to forget the things she had seen in the hallways and meetings where black brilliance was quietly suffocated by the people in charge. But watching Jamal's story unfold, the headlines, the protests, the emails, unearthed something in her that had never fully gone away: guilt. So Miss Brenton sat down at her kitchen table with a manila folder that had moved with her from one apartment to the next. A folder she had almost thrown away more than once. Inside, copies of complaints, disciplinary letters she had intercepted, and a list of student names long forgotten by the system but forever etched in her memory. She wrote a statement. It began with 6 words. This didn't start with Jamal Rivers. She sent it to Dr. Hayden, Clarice's legal team, and eventually leaked it to a local journalist with a subject line that simply read, "It's time." In her letter, Miss Brenton detailed a troubling pattern she had observed between 2003 and 2017, years during which Mr. Alden Clive served as lead math department head. She recounted how high-performing black boys, in particular, were routinely labeled as arrogant, unmanageable, or distracting, especially if they challenged authority or displayed confidence in their intellect. She remembered one boy clearly: Isaiah Wells, a 7th grader who had scored a perfect 800 on a district-wide math benchmark, a feat no other student in the region had ever achieved at that age. But Isaiah never received recognition. Instead, Mr. Clive claimed Isaiah had cheated. The test was invalidated. No one investigated. No one questioned it. Weeks later, Isaiah was accused of pushing a student in the hallway, an allegation never corroborated. He was suspended, then transferred to an alternative school for behavioral monitoring. After that, he vanished from Fairview's records. Brenton tried to raise the alarm. She filed a complaint with her union rep. She submitted a written concern to the district's Diversity Oversight Committee. No one responded. Years passed. The folder gathered dust. Until now. Along with her statement, Brenton submitted copies of her original complaints, emails she had kept, and handwritten testimonies from 3 other staff members, all quietly ignored at the time. Each one painted the same portrait: Clive as not just a teacher but a gatekeeper of selective success, one who punished intellect when it didn't come in the packaging he respected. The public response was immediate and volcanic. Talk shows began referring to Clive, not as an educator, but as an academic saboteur. An op-ed in the Atlanta Courier read, "How many Isaiahs did we lose? How many Jamals never got their moment to solve the impossible equation?" Under mounting public outrage, Fairview's school board convened an emergency session. Protesters gathered outside once again, this time with signs bearing Isaiah's name. Clive didn't appear. He submitted a letter through legal counsel citing stress and unjust targeting. But it wasn't enough. The board suspended him indefinitely, pending the outcome of the federal investigation. Principal Lears, long seen as untouchable, wasn't spared either. Days after Brenton's release, internal documents surfaced showing that Lears had received at least 3 formal complaints over her career regarding Clive's behavior, and ignored each one. In one email dated March 2014, Lears wrote to a colleague, "If we keep rewarding these students just because they test well, we're going to lose control of the classroom culture. It's about balance, not brilliance." The quote spread like wildfire. She was placed on administrative leave within 20. Meanwhile, Clarice stood quietly in her kitchen as her phone buzzed with updates. She scrolled through one headline after another. Photos of Miss Brenton, news segments replaying the statement. Reporters outside Clive's gated home in the suburbs, but something still felt unfinished. "I always knew he wasn't the only one," Clarice said aloud, placing her phone down. Clive was too confident, too covered. Jamal looked up from his notes. He had started working again, solving problems, mapping proofs, filling his mind with numbers instead of noise. Who was covering him? Clarice didn't answer right away. She opened the manila envelope they had received days earlier, the one with the decades-long discrimination pattern, and flipped to the final page. Flagged for redirection by Central Administration. Contacts Superintendent's Office. Project Meridian. Clarice ran her finger beneath the name. Superintendent Lyle Ashcroft. He had been there for 15 years. A name that appeared on district press releases and school ribbon cuttings, but never in the muck of classroom decisions. He was polished, distant and utterly silent throughout the entire scandal. Miss Brenton had offered one final warning in her statement, buried near the end. "If you want the full truth, don't stop with the teachers. The directives came from higher. Clive didn't build the system. He just enforced it." That sentence struck Clarice like a thunderclap. And then the twist. Later that afternoon, Dr. Hayden received a call from an unlisted number. A voice on the line was low, trembling and disguised by a thick Appalachian accent. "I used to work under Ashcroft," the voice said. "Facilities Division. Data processing." "Go on," Hayden urged. "There's a second database," the caller whispered. "Off the books, hidden. They call it the Meridian Ledger. It's where they track students flagged for intervention. Mostly black, mostly poor. It ain't on the main servers." Hayden's breath caught. "How do you know this?" "Because I built the damn code," the caller said. "They told me it was for equity monitoring. But I started seeing patterns. Names disappearing. I saved a copy, burned it to a flash drive. It's still out there." "Where?" Hayden asked. The line crackled. "Check the basement storage at the old Ashfield building. Far west side. Unit C. It's in a blue box labeled Custodial Overflow." Before Hayden could ask another question, the line went dead. He called Clarice, immediately. Then he called Merritt. "This isn't over," Hayden said. "Not even close." Clarice didn't blink. "We're going to Ashfield." As they prepare to leave, a police cruiser pulls up outside Clarice's apartment. A uniformed officer knocks gently on the door and says, "Ma'am, we've been ordered to escort you to district headquarters. The superintendent would like a word in private." The flight to Washington, D.C. was silent. Jamal stared out the window, clouds rolling beneath the wing like quiet thunder. Clarice sat beside him, hands folded tightly in her lap, still unused to flying, but refusing to show it. Merritt, seated across the aisle, flipped through a program brochure for the National Youth Education Summit, his pen already circling Jamal's name. He was the final speaker, the headline act, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't being watched by cameras looking for a mistake. He was being seen for what he was. An invitation had arrived 2 weeks earlier, a keynote spot at the country's most prestigious educational summit, attended by professors, policymakers, and students from all 50 states. The event organizers had seen the viral video, followed the investigation, and read about the leaked Project Meridian files. But what sealed it was something else. Dr. Merritt had submitted Jamal's original equations, including the spiral reduction proof and a new theorem. Jamal had begun sketching just weeks after leaving Fairview. He had also submitted one challenge, an unreleased problem designed by an Ivy League consortium for their incoming math majors. It was meant to be unsolvable in under an hour. Jamal solved it in 16 minutes, and then rewrote it in half the steps. When he arrived at the Walter E. Washington Convention Center, security was waiting, not because he was a threat, but because by now Jamal Rivers was a name that meant something. Protesters had shown up in support. Fans wore shirts that read "From Custodian's Son to Calculus King," and more than once Clarice had to pause as strangers asked to shake her hand. Inside the green room, the nerves finally caught up with him. "What if I mess it up?" Jamal whispered, eyes scanning the glowing exit signs. "You won't," Dr. Merritt said gently. "Because you already solved what they said you couldn't." Clarice straightened his collar. "You're not here for them. You're here for the ones watching at home. The ones sitting in classrooms right now, wondering if anyone like them has ever stood on that stage." That hit. That settled him. When his name was called, the lights dimmed. The room, nearly 5,000 strong, leaned forward as a soft voice introduced him. "Please welcome the youngest keynote speaker in the summit's history, Jamal Rivers." He stepped out into a wave of applause, camera shutters clicking like rain. He stood at the center of the stage, behind a podium so tall he had to lift the mic slightly. He took a breath. "I used to clean classrooms," he began, voice even. "Not as detention, not as punishment, but because my mother worked 3 jobs, and I helped her after school." The room fell into a hush. "I learned math on chalkboards I wasn't supposed to touch, in the silence of rooms where no one thought I was watching." He paused, scanning the crowd. "I didn't get here because I was chosen. I got here because I refused to disappear." He gestured to the screen behind him. A problem, the one reserved for Ivy League students, appeared. "I was asked if I'd try this problem live," he said, a quiet grin spreading across his face. "So I figured, why not?" The next 10 minutes were spellbinding. No notes, no prompts, just Jamal and a marker, breaking down the problem in real time. He didn't just solve it, he explained it with such clarity that students in the audience took notes, not out of obligation, but all. When he circled the final solution and set the marker down, the silence hung for a moment. Then the auditorium erupted. A standing ovation followed. Journalists scrambled to rewrite their headlines. By the time he returned backstage, Jamal Rivers Live was trending across platforms. The next 48 hours were a blur. He was approached by Stanford, then MIT, then Howard, which offered him a full academic scholarship and a mentorship with a Nobel Prize-winning physicist. A private foundation wanted to fund a documentary. Another wanted to build a math tutoring app around his original proofs. A tech CEO offered to fund his education anywhere in the world. But Jamal only accepted one offer. Through Merritt's connections and Clarice's guidance, he partnered with a national education nonprofit to launch a free access mentorship program for underrepresented students in math and science. The initiative, titled Beyond the Board, Black Brilliance in STEM, would pair gifted young minds with university professors, create scholarship pipelines, and teach students how to protect their intellectual work from institutional erasure. Clarice called it his legacy. Jamal called it his beginning. But before anything else, he had one place he needed to return.
Fairview.
Not as a student, but as a speaker. The request had come quietly. The new interim principal, Ms. Kayla Brinton, the same teacher who had testified against Clive, had personally invited him to return and speak at the school's first ever Equity in Education Assembly. The board had changed. Clive was gone. Lears was under federal investigation. The halls were quieter now. The cameras in the isolation room had been removed. And room 208, it had been converted into a student tutoring space. When Jamal stepped through the main doors, students whispered his name in reverence. Some reached out to fist bump him. Others just watched. Ms. Brenton greeted him at the front with tears in her eyes. "You don't know how many of them need to see this," she said. "I do," Jamal replied. The auditorium was filled with 7th and 8th graders, many who had only heard his story in fragments. Some of the same teachers who once stayed silent now sat in the back, unsure whether to cheer or hide. Jamal didn't look for them. He looked for the students, the kids with the notebooks too neat, the hands too afraid to raise. He stood at the same podium used for morning announcements and cleared his throat. "I used to sit in these seats," he began, "and I used to wonder if anyone like me had ever stood here." He smiled. "Now I know." As the assembly ends and students rush to greet him, a nervous freshman steps forward, clutching a crumpled page of notes. He looks up at Jamal and says, "I made a new equation, but no one believes I wrote it. Can you check it for me?" Jamal kneels beside him, eyes scanning the page, and stops. What he sees changes everything. The auditorium was full, not just with students and teachers, but with history, the weight of what had been done here, and the quiet, radiant pulse of what was finally beginning to bloom. Fairview Middle had never seen anything like it. Rows of folding chairs stretched back farther than ever before. News cameras were tucked politely along the walls, flashing only occasionally now, not chasing controversy, but capturing triumph. Community members filled the side aisles, school board officials sat near the back, and on stage, standing behind a microphone that once broadcast daily announcements no one listened to, was the boy they tried to make disappear. Jamal Rivers. He didn't wear a suit, no fancy designer name stitched across his collar, just a clean white shirt, sleeves slightly rolled, and a mind sharp enough to cut through decades of systemic failure. The room held its breath. Jamal paused at the podium, eyes scanning the crowd. Some faces he recognized. Others were new. A few older teachers who had once lowered their eyes now looked up, uncertain whether they were witnesses or participants in something larger than themselves. Clarice sat in the front row, her hands clasped gently on her lap, no longer wearing her custodial uniform, no longer invisible. Her head was high. Her pride was silent but unmistakable. When Jamal spoke, his voice didn't tremble. "I came back because this is where it started," he said, his tone clear and steady. "Where I learned not just math, but where I learned that brilliance, when it comes from the wrong zip code, scares people." There was no anger in his voice, just truth, the kind that made people shift in their chairs. Fairview didn't just try to fail me, it tried to define me. He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. But this place also gave me something I didn't expect: clarity. Because when they isolated me, erased my grades, questioned my intelligence, they showed me exactly what kind of system I was in. A few nods from the audience, a few tears. "I don't hate anyone here," Jamal continued. "Not even Mr. Clive. Because I understand now. He wasn't just afraid of me. He was afraid of what I represented. That genius can come from anywhere. That brilliance doesn't always look like what we've been taught to see." He gestured toward the side of the stage, where a projector displayed photos, not of him, but of others. Snapshots of students from across the country, faces from the mentorship program he had started, notes from kids who had messaged him with their own equations, their own proofs. "I'm not the only one," he said. "I never was." A stillness swept the room. "Today, the room that once belonged to Mr. Clive is something else," he added. "It's a tutoring center, a place for students who need help, who want to learn, who've been told they don't belong in honors classes or STEM camps. Now it's theirs." A small wave of applause broke out from one corner, then another, until it grew into something genuine, warm, alive. Jamal looked toward his mother. "My mom used to clean these floors. She did it so I could sit in these classrooms. And when they tried to silence me, she spoke louder." Clarice blinked back tears. "She's not just my mother," Jamal said. "She's the reason I'm standing here, and she's proof that sometimes the most powerful people in a building are the ones no one listens to." Applause again, louder this time. He raised a hand, gently quieting the room. "But I'm not here for celebration," he said. "I'm here because there are more of me out there, more kids who are being watched, but not seen, heard, but not listened to. Brilliant, but buried." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded sheet, one from a freshman who had handed it to him after his previous speech. "This is an equation written by a student right here at Fairview," he said. "He told me no one believed he wrote it. I did, 'cause I've been that kid." He unfolded the paper. It was messy, written in pencil, with side notes in the margins, and arrows pointing between steps. "But here's what's wild," Jamal said, smiling faintly. "He didn't just solve a problem, he created one. A new way of approaching square root expansion using symmetrical splitting, something I hadn't even considered." The crowd leaned in. "That student? He's in the back. His name is Devante, and he's going to come up here now and walk us through it." There was a stunned pause, followed by the shuffle of a chair scraping back. A boy, shy, eyes wide, notebook clutched in shaking hands, slowly stood up. A teacher gently nudged him toward the aisle. Applause guided his every step. He walked to the stage and stood beside Jamal, looking overwhelmed. "You ready?" Jamal asked softly. Devante nodded. Jamal stepped aside. The boy took the mic. His hands trembled. His voice cracked on the first word. But then he began. Step by step, Devante explained the logic behind his equation. At first uncertain, then steady, then confident. And when he reached the conclusion, the crowd erupted. Not because it was flawless, but because he was believed. Jamal returned to the mic, grinning. "This is what change looks like," he said. "Not one person breaking the system, but one voice inspiring another to rise." He looked out at the students, those like Devante sitting with hope just barely kindled, and those still unsure if it was safe to raise their hand. "Fairview tried to erase me," he said. "Now I'm unforgettable. Not because of what I did, but because of what I refused to stop being." The room stood in unison. Applause thundered through the walls that once silenced genius. After the event, students gathered around Jamal, eager to speak, to share, to be seen. Teachers offered handshakes, some with shame in their eyes, others with genuine admiration. Clarice stood off to the side, watching quietly. Dr. Merritt joined her, smiling. "You raised a movement," he said. "I just raised my boy," Clarice replied. As the crowd began to thin, Jamal started to pack up his notes. Then a small hand tugged at his sleeve. A new student, no more than 12, stood there, nervous, eyes flicking toward the floor. "Can I try solving one?" the boy asked. Jamal knelt to meet his gaze. "You brought a problem?" The boy nodded and held out a wrinkled sheet of notebook paper. Jamal glanced at it, paused, then looked again. His expression shifted. What he saw wasn't just another equation. It was something more, a seed of something new, a pattern he hadn't yet seen before. And in that moment he smiled. Because this quiet reaching forward, this next child asking to be seen, was the answer he had been solving for all along. Jamal turned to the boy and said, "You didn't just solve one, you just created a whole new kind of problem." And across the auditorium, Clarice smiled, because she knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. They tried to silence him because of where he came from. But brilliance can't be mopped away, and truth doesn't stay buried forever. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or erased, this story was for you. Type yes if you believe every child deserves a chance. Subscribe if this broke your heart and opened your eyes.